Welcome everyone to the 10th lesson in the grammar and writing style guide that I'm putting together. This concentrates on paragraph cohesion, which is how a paragraph works together as a unit. What I am not doing is concentrating on how to make a point with the paragraph. I'm not making argumentation points here. What I'm trying to do is talk about a paragraph as a unit. So now we're moving past the sentence into wider units of meaning. The number one key for writing organization generally is the ability to put yourself into your reader's head, to anticipate what he or she is going to want or need or be confused by, and to make changes accordingly in the revision stage. This is particularly true for paragraph organization. So most of the tools that we're looking at, you have to be thinking about what it's like for a first-time reader to come to it. I've made several mentions throughout these lessons to something called the known new contract, and I want to talk about that in detail now. The truth is that writing feels more fluid and connected when sentences begin with a reference to information that is already known or that you've already been talking about earlier in the paper, and then move to information that has not yet been mentioned. This is what we mean by the known new contract. The chief idea here is that each sentence in the paragraph builds a bridge from the sentence that was before it to the sentence that was after it. So each is doing a kind of transitional work in addition to putting forward its claim. You can see this a little bit more clearly up in the diagrams of the three sentences. In each of these, we have known info coming early in the sentence, reaching back to the sentence in front of it, and the new info is introduced in the second half of the sentence. And this is what we mean by the known new contract at a sentence level. Check out how the known new contract works in this paragraph. I've put in red the pieces that reach into the back so that you can see them clearly. Portland, 60 miles from the Pacific Ocean, is by no means immune to the suburbanization that has sapped the vitality from many cities. Its suburbs now contain about 2/3 of the area's 1.4 million residents and about half of the area's jobs. Yet as the suburbs have grown, the downtown has become more attractive and popular than ever. Downtown Portland has distinct edges. Its eastern border is the deep, navigable Willamette River, lined for more than a mile by Tom McCall Waterfront Park, a grassy, mostly level expanse suited to events that draw thousands, such as the Rose Festival — Portland calls itself the City of Roses — a blues festival, and a summer symphony series. Its western border is the steep West Hills, which contain Washington Park, home of the International Rose Test Gardens, where more than 400 varieties of roses are cultivated, and Forest Park, where 4,800 acres of Douglas fir, alder, and maple constitute one of the largest nature preserves and hiking areas in any American city. This passage from Philip Langdon's article, How Portland Does It, contains a lot of known new contract moves. I've made them here in red. Its suburbs leans back into the statement about suburbanization. As the suburbs have grown, leans back onto the idea that the suburbs are increasing. The phrase downtown Portland bounces off of their previous sentences, downtown, so on and so forth. What's great about this style is that it works with a reader's knowledge to make things clear and to create a sense of propulsion. Another tool, in addition to the known new contract, that allows for paragraph cohesion is something called metadiscourse, which sounds rather fancy. But really these are just signals that help the reader understand the writer's message. Metadiscourse means discourse about discourse. These are signals that communicate about the nature of the communication. Metadiscourse is full of some pretty familiar terms from writing. I've isolated them to a few categories, so let's deal with 4 right here. Metadiscourse of addition is about building links between one statement and the next. So moreover, likewise, in addition, these things all move in the same direction, so one thought goes to the next. Metadiscourse of time is exactly that. It's indicating the comparison between one thing and another in relation to time, meanwhile and afterwards. Contrast is moving in the exact opposite direction of addition. We're looking at however, instead, on the contrary, on the other hand. These kinds of words signal that whatever I was talking about before doesn't exactly comport with what I'm talking about now. Metadiscourse of result indicates the consequence, a causal connection between two things. Therefore, so, consequently, as a result, of course. These words indicate a causal relationship between one idea and the next. Let's look at a few more. Metadiscourse of concession is important if I've just brought up a counter-argument that I want to indicate still doesn't take away from my main point. So I've just come from a counter-argument, and then I say, nevertheless, my point still holds, and I put forward evidence to that. Or, at any rate, still, yet. Apposition can be about a few things. It can be about giving examples, for example, for instance, but it can also be about restating something that I've just spoken about before. Words of summary, like thus, then, and in conclusion, indicate that I'm coming to my key point, that I'm going to distill it down into a few phrases. Reinforcement, words like further, indeed, in particular, above all, these are signal words that I really need my reader to pay attention to what I'm about to say. Metadiscourse is not optional. You absolutely need to be able to use words like this in order to let your reader know what you're doing at any given moment. A third important way of unifying paragraphs and making them cohere is parallelism. We've seen parallelism in grammatical sentences, but think about it at the level of a paragraph. Here it's repeated grammatical elements, often combined with repeated words or keywords. This becomes a cohesive device when a structure echoes a structure from a previous sentence or a previous paragraph. Now the key here is to make sure that you do not use parallelism in a way that becomes redundant. What you want to do is add clarity to your sentences and reinforce your points. Let's look at a good example of parallelism from an article from Peter Drucker's article in the Atlantic Monthly. That knowledge has become the key resource means that there is a world economy, and that the world economy, rather than the national economy, is in control. Every country, every industry, and every business will be in an increasingly competitive environment. Every country, every industry, and every business will, in its decisions, have to consider its competitive standing in the world economy and the competitiveness of its knowledge competencies. Not everything about this prose is great. Knowledge competencies sounds like jargon to me. But what I do like is the clarity of the structure that's been built here with everys, the series of everys, both as a series of parallel items within a sentence and then across sentences that are repeated. These reinforce Drucker's point. Here's a more complex example, also from the Atlantic Monthly, this time from an article by James Fallows. The wave of software standardization led by Microsoft products like Windows and Word has made computers simpler to use than they once were. It is easier now than it was a decade ago to sit down at any machine, anywhere, and have an idea of how to make it go. But it is harder for a software developer to introduce a genuinely new approach to word processing, data management, or any other established function. And it is much harder for a company even to keep a program on the market if another product, especially one from Microsoft, seems likely to become the standard in that field. Instead of just repeating phrases like in our last example, Fallows does something really interesting here. He sets up a structure, it is easier, but it is harder, and it is much harder, that allows the reader to understand really clearly the progression of ideas and the relationship of ideas using a parallel structure. The last tool for paragraph coherence that I'll talk about here is levels of generality. This is referring to a method of paragraph organization that enables a writer to clarify how each sentence in a paragraph relates to its predecessor. And the basic idea is that readers find it easier to move from general, orienting information to more specific details about that information. When you think about it, this really makes sense. We want to begin with the general so that if a reader already understands something, they're oriented well, and then even if they didn't understand something, they're now prepared to move into specific details that might be really the heart of your contribution. This idea of levels of generality is illustrated by Joyce Marcus in an article for Scientific American. The Zapotec of the 16th century kept two calendars, one secular and the other ritual. The secular calendar of 365 days was divided into 18 moons of 20 days and one period of 5 days. The ritual calendar of 260 days was divided into 4 units of 65 days called lightnings, or great spirits. Each 65-day period was further divided into 5 periods of 13 days. This may not be the best piece of writing that you've ever come across, but it does exemplify a good use of the levels of generality, and I think that we can learn something from it. It begins where it should, with a broad generalization about the Zapotec. The Zapotec, it tells us, kept 2 calendars, one secular, the other ritual. The second level of generalization here contains both the sentences about the secular calendar and then the ritual calendar. After we are finished with understanding something of the ritual calendar, we learn something more at a third level of generality about the secular calendar. So we're getting more and more specific as we move forward, and that's the idea, moving from the general at the beginning of the paragraph to the specific as we move forward. It is assignment time. For this assignment, I want you to write a paragraph of at least 8 sentences in length about any subject that you like. This could be a song, a job, a good friend, whatever you like. The key here is that you need to obey the following rules. Order the paragraph from general statements to more specific statements within that realm. I also want you to keep the known new contract throughout. I want to be able to see clearly where you're leaning back into previous sentences. A third rule is to use appropriate metadiscourse in every sentence, and I need you to underline that metadiscourse. The last rule is to make use of at least one parallel structure. Take that structure and make its elements bold. Okay, best of luck.